Hey everyone, greetings from Kulshan Studios. So today I'm going to be doing a little sound demo for lead sounds. On any given synthesizer, to add a little bit of that human element is creating subtle pitch movement within your sound. And I'm here to give you a little simple tip that'll help you with all of your lead sounds in pretty much any genre of music you can think of. So we're going to start off with a riff from a hard trance tune that me and a buddy in Finland did a number of years ago, Cascade Highway. I'm just going to be starting out with a simple supersaw lead. I'm going to build it from scratch, but it's going to be really quick to build it. The Nord Lead 3 has a really nice, fully laid out interface, so it's easy to follow along. And because of the simplicity of its interface, this is a sound that you can recreate on any synth, hardware or VST. You could do this in Silent, you could do this in Omnisphere, Dune, Spire, Serum, whatever. Doesn't matter. These are basic sounds that use very basic principles to create a really nice musical tone that will help you stand out and make your sounds a little more lush. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. Okay, we've got the keyboard all set up. We've got a stock initial sawtooth wave patch going on right now. Nothing super remarkable, so we're going to jump right in and start making a supersaw ARP lead so that you can get a feel for the harmonics, and then I'm going to get into the pitch modulation stuff that I've been talking about so you can get a feel for how that might affect some of your sounds as you're designing your own patches. I've loaded up the ARP lead from my old tune Cascade Highway, so here we go. First things first, I'm going to turn the oscillator mix to 50% so that I've got both oscillators going, two sawtooths. Now I'm going to detune a little bit. There's our first step. Now I'm going over to the stack detune over here, which is unison. And this actually works on any waveform, not just saws, but in this particular context, we're doing sawtooths. And it multiplies the voices by 5 without affecting polyphony, which is super nice. But that means that we'll effectively have 10 sawtooth waves playing here. And now, we detune. Okay, and now I turn up the envelope release a whole bunch, turn up the amp envelope a bunch. I like to flesh all of that out fully, and now I tighten the filter decay and the filter sustain, turn up the filter resonance just a hair, and then pull down the cutoff, and then I pull up the amp envelope. And now, I have a nice supersaw lead sound. It's nice and tight. So we've got that going now. And now's where we're going to start adding the sounds that I've been talking about. So over here in the mod envelope section, I've got all these different options. And so the first one that I'm going to do here, and the only one I can do really, is I'm going over to the oscillator, which is essentially the oscillator pitch sections. And I'm going to enable both of those. And I'm going to set the decay on this to about 0.3 seconds. And now I'm going to pull up the amount on the mod envelope and check out what happens. See, it sounds kind of weird and cartoony and funky right now. I pull it down a little bit more. Now it sounds kind of like a 90s Eurodance brass kind of sound, which is too silly for what we're going for. But now, very subtle pitch modulation. Not a lot, just a little. And for a little extra fun, we can go over to the LFO, and we can do this to the oscillator as well, and create subtle progressive movement over the course of the whole riff. It sounds really silly right now, doesn't it? Now we slow it way down, and then pull the volume down. Pull down that amount to a really subtle and low amount, and presto, we've got movement. It's not a lot. You almost wouldn't even notice it unless you were really listening for it. But it's there. And now, we'll have a little fun and add some reverb and delay to this sound so we can hear it as if it were in a track. This reverb and delay is coming off the virus, by the way. I can even do a little bit extra by adding a small boost at about 7 kHz, and that brings out the air in the sound. Makes it sound real nice. Check it out. And with that 7 kHz boost, it's kind of like the pitch modulation. A little bit goes a long way, and you almost wouldn't notice it, but when you don't have it, you kind of do notice it. But it brings out everything. And of course, octave spreading your sounds also tends to help as well. If you pull it up 12, it sounds pretty cool. Adds some extra energy to it, I think. And pulling it down to -12 adds extra grit in the low end, which is also super cool. Okay, now we're going to move on to a Dumont lead sound, so you can get a feel for how to create kind of those wailing kind of sounds that have a lot of energy in them and sound super cool. Okay, now we've got it reset back to just a stock sawtooth wave, and we've got it pulled down with all the effects off, so it's just a sawtooth wave. And now we're going to go ahead and launch into doing the lead sound from Jürgen Vries's The Theme. And this is an example of the wailing lead with some more extreme pitch modulation and some pulse width modulation that adds a lot of extra character to the sound. So go ahead and follow along as I work here, and ask questions down in the comments if you've got any. First things first, I'm going to set the main oscillator to a pulse wave. And I'm going to set it to a moderate percentage up, because the original does not have a straight square wave, and it does have a small amount of sawtooth in it, I think, for a little bit of lower end grit and low end harmonics. So we're going to bring in oscillator 2. I believe there's also a little bit of distortion going on there, and I like to use the filter drive type so that distortion using the filter drive section here in the oscillator mod, because it adds a tiny bit of crunch without being too in your face. Although you have to be kind of careful on the Nord because it can tend to distort pretty easily, so I like to make it subtle. And now we're going to have a little fun with mono and legato, and setting a tiny bit of glide. And now we're going to go into the filter section. Add a little bit of movement there, do a little bit to the filter section, extend out the whole lead there, increase the amp envelope release and the filter envelope release. going to pull up the resonance a bit. We're going to pull down the filter cutoff. And now we're going to pull up so now we've got the basis of the sound. Now we're going to go in and do LFO modulation to the pitch, because that's where it really starts to count on this particular sound. And now we're going to turn down the amount. Hear that? Subtle bit of movement, not super in your face. Now we're going to do something similar, but for the oscillator shape of oscillator 1. I overshot it there. There we go. And now, observe. So this is essentially that entire sound, but missing the effects. So I'm going to go ahead and start turning on the effects. I'm going to pull down the cutoff so that we can hear it without anything. And now we're going to put on some reverb and delay so you can hear it as it is more or less in context. Now if you want to add a little extra character to this sound, we can do a little fun with the mod envelope here. We can go and set the mod envelope to affect LFO1, and then we just play around with the speed settings on it, and then mess with the amount, and see where this takes us. So that is essentially how you can create a really nice wailing lead sound without too much effort. And something that you may also want to mess around with is also syncing your mod envelope to the shape of the pulse width and the pitch if you can, or just play around with combinations of the two to see what you happen to like the most. And don't be afraid to add extra distortion. And I do believe that Dumont tended to layer their wailing leads with supersaws, so it created extra width and created more harmonics that lent a lot more character and grit to the sound in the highs and the mids. So you can experiment around with different combinations of different sounds and see what results you get from that. Now the next sound we're going to move on to is going to be a big monster pad, and this is a little trick to getting a little extra character and movement in your pads so that they don't feel so sterile and flat. So we're going to go ahead and cue everything up for that. Alright, so the next sound that I've got queued up for you here is a pad from a tune that I released back in 2018. This one is from Tsuli. It's a big supersaw trance tune, kind of in the vein of some of Armin van Buuren's Rising Star remixes from the early 2000s. Those like big pad-heavy anthems. Big fan of those, and they seem to get a pretty decent crowd reaction, so I like working with those. So I'm going to design a big trance pad using that riff, and I'm going to show you some pitch modulation things that you can use, and some other special tricks that you can use to create a little extra movement and interest in your sound. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Alright, so we've got ourselves a big super saw pad here. Nothing super out of the ordinary at the moment, but now we're going to have some fun. I'm going to first turn up the cutoff just a wee bit so that you can hear the sound with a little more clarity. Now I'm going to go ahead and set the shape of the oscillator volume. I'm going to set the oscillator pitch to both oscillators. I'm going to mess with the pitch. I'm going to do it at a moderate speed. And now I'm going to turn down the amount. Okay, so now we've done that. That's the pitch modulation for this, and it's subtle, but it's there, and you can play with the speed as you like to create more or less movement. But now we're going to do something else. We're going to go over to the pan, and we're going to also mess with it. We're going to set it to a modest speed, and then we're going to pull it back down a bit. So now if you listen, an already wide sound has a tiny bit of movement going on without any super washy, like binaural effect kind of feel going to it. Now we'll pull up that cutoff, and the sound is now filling out the stereo field. There's a bit of pitch movement going on, so it's really nice. And in fact, we can go ahead and use the mod envelope at some interesting settings to play with the LFO movement a bit. This way the pitch doesn't move in just a single static way. It has a little bit more character going on, a little more movement. Now we will go ahead and add some reverb and delay, and you can hear how this would sound in a mix.